Hey guys, Pete here. Fargo Season 4 has come to an end. A history lesson on the alternate economy of Kansas City set the stage for a full-blown gang war that consumed the city as 1950 gave way to 1951. As we've come to expect from Fargo, it has no shortage of interesting characters, career criminals, law enforcement officers, and of course some civilians who find themselves caught up in the action. Season 4 gave us a whole gang of underdogs. A fail son who finds himself in charge of his connected mafia family, an angel of death who has an affinity for baking, a chatty Mormon U.S. Marshal who's earned the nickname Deafy because he only hears what he wants to hear, a duo of escaped convicts who fancy themselves as outlaws rather than criminals, a student who happens on her next-door neighbor's deadly secret, and a local cop who the U.S. military thought would make a great minesweeper, even though he's plagued with nervous tics. Fargo's fourth season also gave us the origin story of a fan-favorite character from Season 2, and the showrunner has provided some additional context for that in his post-finale interviews, which I'll get into in a little while. Before we begin, as is tradition, this is your spoiler warning. If you haven't watched all 11 episodes of Fargo Season 4, then this video will absolutely spoil it. My goal here is to explain the ending after all. I'm also going to talk about some of the previous seasons, so if you're a latecomer to the series, it's something to think about. However, I don't think that will spoil those seasons any more than watching Season 4 would. With that out of the way, let's get started. If you followed along with my Season 4 episode recap and reviews, you know I had some problems with this season compared to the previous installments. At the same time, it had some great ideas and some great characters, all served up in a great-looking period piece that boasted some gorgeous cinematography. So today, I just wanted to talk about the ending, what Noah Hawley might have been trying to say, what the ending means for Kansas City and its characters, what the ending means for the rest of the series, and in the end, what's worth remembering. Fargo always features at least one character that could be described as inherently good. You've got all these criminal types running around doing their thing, and on the other side you've got your Lou and Molly Solversons and your Gloria Burgles. These are usually cops, they're usually white, and so Season 4 changes this up. Our moral center this time around is Ethelrida Pearl Smutny, a biracial teen whose parents find themselves caught up with the local black criminal outfit. Their attempt to pay off their debt to Loy Cannon, using money that Zelmer and Swanee stole from him, creates a situation where he takes over their family business. In the end, it's Ethelrida's wits that help her family come away with a happy ending. She uses Donatello Faddas' ring, which she found in Orietta Mayflower's apartment, to broker a deal with Loy Cannon and help him win his war in the 10th episode. We see her pick up a pair of suitcases and leave in the finale, and the showrunner has confirmed that she makes it out in the end. He said that her reward for surviving the story is that she goes off and has an unremarkably positive life. She's going to move to Paris, she's going to become a writer, and she's going to prosper outside of America. She knows in that moment that she can't prosper inside America, and she has the wherewithal to get out. And the season as a whole fits into her school history report, which the season opens and closes with. I'll get into that history report at the end, but for now, let's look at the different sides of the gang war and how things played out for each side in the season finale. Josto finds himself as the boss of the Fadda family after he makes an offhanded comment about his father to a nurse that he got some drugs off of. She turned out to be a serial killer. She killed his father, and since their outfit is structured as a family business, that means he's now in charge. He's not really the right guy for the job. By the time we reach the finale, that ring I mentioned that Ethelrida gave over to Loy Cannon is now in the hands of the family's concierge, who accuses him of killing his father in order to take over the business. And they've bailed his accomplice out of jail, who's more than happy to cop to the murder. Josto isn't a sympathetic character. He's pretty much an incompetent, arrogant ass when it comes down to it. But that isn't all there is to his story. After all, he was traded away as a child just like Satchel and Rabbi, and we know he was the victim of abuse in that situation. In the end, he did start the whole gang war, but it was by accident, and Ebal used that opportunity to his own advantage. His story winds up being tragic in that he reconciles with his brother only to see him die shortly afterward, and then his own people take him down for the crime of taking power for himself, with Ebal using that as a vehicle to do the exact same thing. Orietta's confession is enough to earn them both a bullet in the head, and she manages to salt his wounds by requesting that he's killed first so that she can watch him die. Before he goes, he makes the case that his own men killing him is what they want us to do. It's a ladder, but there's nowhere to go. And that is where he found himself. He made it to the top and wound up at the bottom of an unmarked grave in the middle of nowhere. This did make for my favorite sequence of the finale, and that had a lot to do with my favorite character of Season 4, Orietta Mayflower. We see that she does enjoy watching this lover of hers die, and when it's her turn, she doesn't seem all that worried about it. There was one curious thing here that I missed in my previous video, and that's that when she's looking at her reflection, we also see the reflection of the ghost, aka Mr. Snowman, aka Captain Roach. I don't have a great explanation for why the ghost is now following her, but this could be a bright spot considering that this might mean that he doesn't follow the Smutny family anymore. On the Cannon side of things, Loy almost makes it out on top. He's able to dispatch Leon and his uncle Happy, who double-crossed him siding with Josto. He finds out that his son, who he traded for power, who he thought had died, did manage to make it home. At this point, all the work and all the sacrifices seem to have paid off. And then things take a turn when he realizes that Ebal Volante, who's now in charge of the family, won't honor their deal. It's a situation where Ebal knows he has the power behind him, so he sees no reason to give anything to Loy. This is something we'd seen throughout the season. In episode 1, Ethelrida described it like this: whoever was last off the boat, finding the doors of honest capital closed, rolled up their sleeves and got to work getting rich the old-fashioned way. So these different ethnic criminal gangs essentially turn to crime as a way to make a living. As immigrants, they're all seen as outsiders, but Loy and his people are in a different situation. Because they're black, they'll never be able to assimilate into that society in the same way. And we saw this with the credit card. He had a great idea. We all know how that would turn out. But rather than cut him in, the bank manager just took his idea and made it his own, with no real fear of that coming back on him. So in the finale, we see Loy cut out, we see him lose all his power, and then we see him return home, seeing his family together, and having that moment of clarity where he realizes he may not get that, but he does have this. In Noah Hawley's words, Loy realizes, I thought I needed more power to keep him safe, and now that I have no power, no one is after us, and maybe this is a good thing. He has this moment where he thinks maybe this is a happy ending, and then of course we know how that ends. Zelmare Roulette returns to avenge her lost lover, Swanee Caps. She stabs Loy multiple times and he dies. And what's interesting about that is that she does this in retaliation. He gave them train tickets, he sent them away, and then he went back on his word. He told the cops where they were going. And so, as it usually does in this universe, the things you do can come back to you, and this one decision does him in. I mentioned him trading his son for power. The idea there that we saw had been going on for generations without much luck was that each family would trade a son, and that would prevent the escalation of hostilities. When Josto was going to break that deal and have Satchel killed, Rabbi Milligan swooped in to save him. Before he was carried away to his end by a tornado, he'd been taking the majority of his time taking care of Satchel and preparing him for the world. His motivation was that he wanted Satchel to have a choice. Rabbi was made a child soldier, as were many of the kids in these families. They didn't have a say in it. So when the war breaks out, he takes him away, leaving Satchel on his own with this new dog Rabbit that he found in their hotel. Ultimately, he decides to go home to his family, where he gets a brief reunion that ends in watching his father die right in front of him. Now, I mentioned that Ethelrida and her family made it out with a happy ending. And as the storyteller, the one that explained this world that these characters inhabit and the things that they're up against, I think she wraps it up really nicely in the ending of her report. She says, history is a form of memory, but what does it mean to remember? Ask yourself, who writes the books? Who chooses what to remember and what gets forgotten? And damn it if it isn't Satchel, aka Mike Milligan. This is his memory. This is what we see him thinking about when we see the images overlapped, where we see him riding down the road. We see the image of Satchel and Rabbit making their way, thinking about Rabbi, who always warned him if he didn't return, then he was either dead or in jail. We see Mike Milligan taking the clip out of his gun and putting in the next one in the exact same way we saw Rabbi doing that earlier in the season. And we see that all of this that's happened, Satchel Cannon / Mike Milligan, he's the one that carries the memory. When we meet him again in 1979, we see that he ends up working for the organization that took his father down. Of course, he knows it was Zelmare that actually killed him, but his conflict with the Faddas is what brought him to that place. Again, to reference the showrunner, when asked about what happens between Satchel being on the porch and watching his father die and the moment where we meet Mike years later, he said his feeling was that the family wasn't able to stay in that house, their source of revenue dried up after Loy died, that they inevitably went through some hard times, and that then ultimately Satchel didn't have a lot of opportunity in his life, and he had to go back to those skills he learned from Rabbi. He said that on some level, the moment his dad was killed in front of him, he didn't really have that choice that Rabbi wanted him to have anymore, and that he had to change his name because being a Cannon wasn't a safe thing to be. So he chose the Milligan name. Then at a certain point, having laundered his identity, he started pulling jobs of some kind and ended up in the Kansas City Mafia, which is ultimately what became of the Fadda family business when Ebal took over. In a different interview, when asked why he wanted to tell Mike Milligan's story, Hawley said, "I suppose on some level this story is an attempt to explain the origins of someone as unique as him. The idea that he's Cannon's son, but raised by a second father, who himself was raised by Irish and Jewish and Italian parents, and on some level that's the history of America right there." In season 2, we also see what becomes of Ebal's vision. We see Joe Bulow still in a role with the organization, and we see his interactions with the Gerhardt family. He mentions the problems he has with the family business, and now we know where those beliefs came from. It's all a reflection of the bigger picture. In the 1950s, all these gangs of others were stirred up fighting against each other rather than the system that put them in that position. As time goes on, power's consolidated, and smaller outfits are absorbed like all the mom and pop shops that go out of business when Walmart moves in. There really was no place for the Cannon Syndicate in that new Kansas City. We also see what's to become of Mort Kellerman after he killed Josto and Gaetano's mother, and it will be interesting to watch it again with all this new information. And with that, I think I've touched on all the things I wanted to when I set out to make this video today. If you're looking for a more in-depth breakdown and critique, I did all the episodes except number 7 in this season, and in my finale video, I gave my overall review for the season. I will say that after reading all these interviews, it does sound like there's a really good chance we'll get more Fargo in the future. At least one more season. No guarantees there, of course, but it's clear there's interest when you hear him talk about this story. I think I probably have one more Fargo video coming this weekend. I'm thinking of doing one where I look at all the different connections across the seasons. So please like this video if you enjoyed it. Please subscribe to my channel if you haven't already. Thanks for watching. I'll talk to you soon.